They called it Devil's Acre, a patch of Louisiana soil so black and rich it could grow anything, even secrets. At the heart of it stood the old Briarwood Plantation, where Master Silas Wren ruled like a god. His land stretched farther than the eye could see, and his word was law. But behind the grand white columns of his mansion, something darker thrived than anyone dared speak aloud. Silas had 3 daughters, each born a year apart, Clara, Evelyn, and Ruth. To the world, they were the image of grace, soft-spoken, polite, perfect Southern ladies. But the servants whispered that their eyes weren't right, too pale, too still, like something was watching through them. The oldest, Clara, once told a maid that she heard voices in the walls at night. The second, Evelyn, claimed she could see the dead walking near the old oak grove. And the youngest, Ruth, only 13, was found one morning sitting in the yard, staring at the soil and murmuring, "It's not dirt, it's bones." The rumors spread fast, but no one dared question the master. Silas was a man obsessed with control, of people, of nature, of fate itself. He believed his bloodline was destined for greatness, and every Sunday he made his daughters kneel before the family portraits, whispering, "Purity of blood brings power." But the strangest thing was the man who worked the fields, a tall, broad-shouldered slave named Jonah, known as the Ox, stronger than any man alive, yet silent as a shadow. Silas treated him differently. Some said with fear, others said with guilt. Jonah was never whipped, never sold, and never allowed to leave the grounds. Then one summer night, the moon turned a deep red, and everything began to change. Clara awoke screaming. A mark had appeared on her shoulder, shaped like a twisted vine, pulsing faintly as if alive. The next morning, Evelyn had the same mark right over her heart. The doctor from town called it a rash. The preacher called it the devil's hand. But the servants whispered that it was a curse, the curse of Briarwood blood. When Silas heard the whispers, he gathered everyone in the courtyard. His voice trembled as he warned, "No one leaves this land. No one speaks of what they've seen." That night, Jonah was seen digging near the old well, not for water, but for something buried long ago. The wind carried a woman's cry through the cane fields, and the candles in the mansion burned blue. By morning, the eldest daughter, Clara, was gone. Her bed was soaked in mud and covered in small handprints, as if the earth itself had reached up and taken her. And from the shadows of the field, Jonah watched the mansion silently, his eyes glinting with something that wasn't quite human anymore. What secret was buried beneath Briarwood Plantation? Why did the earth itself seem alive? And what was Jonah hiding in the dark? In Next reveals the truth that turned this plantation into a curse. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. If you dare return to Devil's Acre. By the time the sun rose over Devil's Acre, Clara Wren was still missing. Her bedroom windows were wide open, the curtains stiff with dew, and footprints, bare, muddy, and small, led straight to the edge of the swamp behind the house. But no one followed them, not even the master himself. For 2 days, Master Silas Wren locked himself in his study. The household was forbidden to speak her name, yet her sisters, Evelyn and Ruth, swore they could still hear her. Soft footsteps in the hallway, whispers behind the wallpaper, a voice calling from the well. On the 3rd night, Evelyn's candle went out on its own. When she struck another match, she gasped. The same mark that had appeared on Clara's shoulder was now crawling down her own arm, dark as ink and warm as fever. It twisted like a vine, forming the shape of an eye at her wrist. She ran to her father's study, crying, "It's spreading!" But Silas didn't look surprised. He simply muttered, "The blood remembers." The housekeeper, an old woman named May, knew the story the others didn't, the one passed down among the enslaved workers. She told Evelyn in secret. Long ago, before this mansion rose, this land belonged to the Atoka tribe. They said the soil was sacred and cursed. When the master's grandfather took it, he buried what was left of them right where your house now stands. May's voice dropped. That's why the land grows things it shouldn't. That's why the strong man Jonah was never sold. He was born from that soil and bound to it. That night, the younger sister Ruth followed Jonah to the fields. She saw him kneel by the old oak tree and press his hands into the ground. The earth moved beneath him, like something alive. He whispered words she couldn't understand. When he stood, his palms were black, not with dirt, but with blood. The next morning a storm rolled in out of nowhere. Thunder shook the plantation. Lightning struck the bell tower and set the sky on fire. Evelyn collapsed at breakfast, the mark on her arm glowing faintly. Her father dragged her to the cellar, the same place no one was ever allowed to go. The heavy doors closed behind them. Hours later, Jonah appeared at the back of the house. His clothes were wet, his eyes distant. He looked at Ruth and whispered, "Don't go down there." He's calling them back. That night Ruth disobeyed. She crept down to the cellar, barefoot, heart pounding. The air smelled of salt and copper. In the flicker of a dying lantern, she saw something carved into the stone walls, hundreds of names. Some were scratched out. At the center of the room, her father stood over Evelyn, chanting in a language she'd never heard. On the floor beside them was Clara's locket, still warm. Ruth screamed. Her father turned, eyes glowing faintly red in the dark. "It's too late, child," he whispered. "The bloodline must finish what it began." The lantern shattered. The room went dark, and when the thunder rolled again, only Ruth's scream echoed up from the cellar. Then silence. By morning, the cellar doors were open, but no one was inside. Only 3 muddy footprints led back toward the fields, one large, 2 small, vanishing into the mist. What did Ruth see in that cellar? And what was Jonah really guarding beneath the soil of Devil's Acre? In Next, the preacher arrives, the truth behind the Wren bloodline begins to surface. Like, share, and subscribe before the curse finds you next. The rains didn't stop for 3 days. The plantation flooded, the fields turned to black water, and the townsfolk said even the crows refused to fly over Devil's Acre. By the 4th morning, a stranger appeared on horseback, a preacher named Elias Crane. His black coat was soaked, his Bible wrapped in oilskin and his eyes sharp as knives. He said he'd been called by the Lord after hearing of a family cursed by their own blood. No one welcomed him. The servants only crossed themselves when he passed. But when Jonah saw him, the strong man froze, and for the first time he spoke. "You shouldn't have come here, preacher. The ground's already fed enough." Elias didn't answer. He only looked toward the house, toward the cellar that locals whispered was the gate. That night, the preacher asked to stay inside the mansion. Master Silas Wren allowed it, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. The preacher said he wanted to hold a prayer service for the family, to purge the evil that had taken root, but the daughters were gone. All 3. Only Silas sat at the table that evening, pale and trembling, speaking as if they were still alive. He poured tea into empty cups, said grace, and whispered, "My angels are only resting." Elias watched quietly, and when the clock struck midnight, he followed the faint sound of humming coming from the hall. It led him to a mirror. In its reflection, the preacher saw the 3 sisters standing behind him, their faces calm, eyes black as pitch. He spun around, nothing. But when he turned back, the mirror was cracked. From the inside, he rushed to the cellar door. It was nailed shut, just as Jonah had warned. "Open it," he demanded. Silas appeared in the hall, holding a lantern. "You think you understand faith, preacher," he said softly. "But faith is obedience. And obedience demands sacrifice." The lantern light flickered. Behind Silas, the shadows on the wall began to move. Shapes of hands, dozens of them crawling up toward the ceiling. Elias ripped the Bible from his coat, opening to the book of Exodus. "You've bound your blood to the earth," he shouted, "but the earth demands more than blood. It wants souls." The wind howled. The windows shattered inward, scattering glass like rain. In that instant, Jonah burst through the door, chains still hanging from his wrists. He grabbed Silas and threw him to the ground, but when the lantern rolled, Elias saw it clearly. Jonah's back was covered in the same vine-shaped mark, crawling up his spine like living roots. "Why do you fight him?" Silas gasped, blood on his lips. "You were born from the same curse. You're the key." Jonah hesitated, just long enough for Silas to whisper something into his ear. The strong man dropped the lantern, eyes wide, as if remembering something terrible. The flames caught the drapes. The mansion began to burn. Elias dragged Silas toward the door, but the old man laughed, a wild, broken laugh that echoed through the storm. "You can't save them, preacher," Silas rasped. "The curse isn't mine anymore. It's hers." Elias turned back and saw a small figure standing at the top of the stairs. Ruth Wren, her eyes glowing faintly red, the same mark blooming across her neck. "Father," she whispered. "It's finished." The roof collapsed. Was Ruth Wren truly alive, or something the curse had claimed as its own? And what secret did the preacher uncover in the ashes of Briarwood? In next, the forbidden cellar reveals the terrifying origin of the Wren family's curse. Like, share, and subscribe if you dare return to Devil's Acre. When the fires of Briarwood Plantation finally died, nothing remained but ash and bones. The mansion's grand pillars lay scattered like broken teeth. For days, the townsfolk whispered that the flames had burned blue and that the smoke had carried faces. But one man walked out alive. Preacher Elias Crane. He was found kneeling in the mud, clutching his Bible with both hands. His skin was burned, his voice gone, and carved into his arm, just beneath the skin, was a faint black mark. The townsfolk begged him to leave the land. But Elias stayed. Something in those ruins called to him, something he couldn't walk away from. At night, the cries still echoed through the cane fields, soft, childlike, and familiar. He could hear Ruth Wren's voice whispering from beneath the ground. So on the 7th night after the fire, Elias returned to what was left of the cellar, the place the townspeople refused to approach. He carried only his Bible, a lantern, and a rusted key he'd found near the ashes of the master's desk. When he turned the key in the iron door, it opened with a groan, as if something inside had been waiting. The air that escaped was cold, too cold for summer in Louisiana. He stepped inside. The walls were still blackened from fire, but the carvings had survived, those strange names etched deep into stone. This time he could read them, not in English but in Latin, words of binding, words of blood. Sanguis vincit mortem. Blood conquers death. At the center of the cellar stood a stone altar. Beneath it, a trapdoor. He lifted it, and his lantern light fell on something impossible. Dozens of preserved jars, each holding what looked like strands of hair, bits of bone, even small glass vials filled with blood. And on the largest jar, the initials CW scratched into the glass. Clara Wren. His hands shook. The jar pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. Behind him a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come back, preacher." It was Jonah. His face was half burned, but his eyes were clear now, sad, human. He stepped forward, holding something in his hand, the broken chain from his wrist. It was never about power, Jonah said. It was about undoing what he started. Elias demanded to know the truth. Jonah told him the story the Wren family buried for generations. The first Silas Wren, the master's grandfather, had stolen sacred land from the Atoka tribe. To seal his theft, he took a woman from the tribe and forced her to bear his child. But before she died, she cursed him. "Your blood will bind with the soil. Your children will feed it." Every generation since then had tried to purify the family bloodline, believing sacrifice could cleanse it. But each ritual only made the curse stronger. Jonah wasn't a servant at all. He was a descendant of that first child, born half from the Wrens, half from the soil that hated them. That's why the master feared him. That's why the curse lived in his veins too. Elias realized too late. The cellar itself was alive. The walls began to hum, the jars trembling. And from the shadows, a small figure stepped forward. Ruth Wren. Her eyes glowed faintly, her skin pale as candle wax. "You can't break it," she said softly. "It's already inside you." Before Elias could move, she placed her hand on his arm. The mark beneath his skin flared bright red. The preacher screamed as the earth beneath the cellar began to open. What rose from beneath the cellar that night? And what did Ruth Wren truly become? In next, the night of fire. The curse awakens in full, and the soil of Devil's Acre demands its final offering. Like, share, and subscribe if you dare uncover the last secret of Briarwood. The ground shook beneath Devil's Acre. The cellar was collapsing. The earth, groaning like something ancient, had awakened after centuries of sleep. Preacher Elias Crane stumbled backward, clutching his burning arm. The mark Ruth had touched now glowed through his sleeve, pulsing with a heartbeat not his own. Ruth stepped closer, her voice soft and strange. "It wants to live through you now. The bloodline can't end, only change." Jonah roared in defiance and grabbed her wrist. "No! You don't understand, child. It's not your blood anymore, it's the land's." The floor split open. From below came a sound, not wind, not water, but breathing. Elias's lantern fell into the crack, and in that brief flicker he saw what lay beneath. Thousands of faces, pale and unmoving, pressed into the dirt, eyes open, mouths silently screaming. The souls of everyone the Wrens had buried under their curse. Ruth's voice deepened, echoing with many voices. "They're not dead, Jonah, they're waiting." The vines carved into the cellar walls began to move, snaking out like living veins. They coiled around Jonah's arms and legs, dragging him toward the pit. Elias tried to pull him free, shouting prayers through gritted teeth, but every word only made the mark on his arm burn hotter. Jonah looked at him with hollow eyes. "You can't save me, preacher." "You can only end it." Elias hesitated. His Bible slipped from his grasp, landing open on the wet floor, the fire from his lantern catching its pages. The words of Exodus burned first, then the rest. The smoke rose black and thick. Suddenly Ruth screamed. The vines recoiled, the cellar shuddered, and a blast of wind knocked Elias back against the wall. When he looked again, Jonah was gone, pulled into the earth below. Only his broken chain remained on the ground. Ruth knelt beside the pit, crying. Her voice shifted between a child's sob and something far older. "He was never meant to suffer. None of us were." Elias dragged himself up, coughing through the smoke. "Then let it end, Ruth. Burn it all. Let the curse die with this place." For a long moment she stared at him, then nodded. She placed her hands on the ground, whispering words that weren't human. The air went still. The vines stopped moving, and then fire. It started as a glow beneath the soil, then erupted in a wave that tore through the plantation. The sky turned crimson, the cane fields lit like candles. The souls buried beneath began to rise as ash and light, swirling around Ruth like a storm. Elias shielded his face as she looked at him one last time. Tell them we were more than monsters." The cellar collapsed completely, swallowing her and the fire together. By dawn, Briarwood Plantation was nothing but smoke and ruin. The curse, it seemed, had finally burned itself out. But as Elias rode away, his arm throbbed once more. The mark had faded, but beneath his skin something moved. He whispered to himself, "Blood conquers death," and the wind carried the words through the empty fields, as if the land still remembered. Was the curse truly destroyed, or merely reborn through the preacher himself? In the chilling finale in next, The Curse Lives On. Discover what the survivors of Devil's Acre carried into the next century. Like, share, and subscribe if you dare witness how the bloodline refuses to die. 30 years passed after the fire that devoured Briarwood Plantation. The world moved on. The cane fields were reclaimed by weeds, the grand house swallowed by vines and silence. Locals built new farms miles away, but no one dared settle on the black soil of Devil's Acre. They said the ground still whispered when it rained. But in 1904, a surveyor named Thomas Crane arrived, grandson of the preacher who'd once walked out of those flames. He had never believed the family stories, not until the first night he camped near the ruins, because the land remembered his name. That night, the wind carried a woman's voice, faint, like a hymn sung underwater. Tell them we were more than monsters. Thomas woke with a start. The soil beneath his tent was damp and warm, and on his wrist, just above his pulse, a small red mark had appeared. A vine shaped like an eye. At breakfast, his assistant asked what was wrong. Thomas said nothing. He only stared at the ruins of the cellar ahead, the one place untouched by time. When they descended into it, they found walls still blackened with ash. But the altar at its center was clean, untouched by age. Carved into it were new words, ones no one had seen before. The blood sleeps, but the soil dreams. Thomas touched the stone. The ground trembled. His assistant backed away, terrified. "We should go. This place ain't right." Thomas nodded, but something deep inside him said otherwise. He could feel the heartbeat in the soil, matching his own. That night he dreamed of Ruth Wren. She stood in a field of ash, her hair white, her eyes calm. "You carry his blood," she said. "The preacher thought he burned the curse, but fire only feeds it. It's in you now. It's always been." When Thomas awoke, the lantern had gone out. His assistant was gone too. Only footprints led into the fog, then vanished. He tried to leave the land, but every path circled back to the ruins. The trees shifted like they were alive, herding him toward the cellar again. The air thickened, heavy, wet, alive. Thomas collapsed beside the old altar, clutching his arm. The mark pulsed, spreading up his veins like fire beneath the skin, and from the ground he heard voices, whispering his family name. "Crane, Wren, blood of both." The circle is complete. The cellar filled with light, red, bright, blinding. When the locals found the site the next morning, Thomas's tent was still standing, his notes scattered in the dirt. But of the man himself there was no sign. Only one strange detail remained. The ground around the ruins was covered in fresh green vines, blooming in the dead of winter. Each vine bore tiny white flowers that looked almost like eyes. Since then, every few decades, someone new disappears near Devil's Acre, a wanderer, a surveyor, a curious traveler. And every time the earth grows thicker, richer, darker, as if it's been fed. They say if you walk that ground during a storm, you can still hear a little girl's voice whisper, "The bloodline never dies. It just waits." Some say the Briarwood curse still sleeps beneath Louisiana's soil, waiting for the next crane or the next wren to wake it again. Tell me, would you dare step onto Devil's Acre? Like, share and subscribe if you're brave enough, because some stories don't end. They just begin again.